Could the House please come to order? Could all delegates please take their seat? Could the House please come to order? Could the admin staff please close the doors?
The club isn't the best place to find the lovers, so the bar is where I go. Me and my friends at the table doing shots, tripping fast, and then we talk slow. And you come over and start up a conversation with just me, and trust me, I'll give it a chance. Now take my hand, stop it, and the man on the jukebox, and then we start to dance.
We want to welcome you to the opening ceremony of OLMUN Model United Nations 2019. Once again, my name is Dennis Kirsch. I'm 19 years old and the President of the General Assembly.
My name is Rasmus Konrad. I'm 18 years old and this is Deputy President of the GA.
First of all, we want to give you a little overview and a schedule about what's happening in the next 3 hours. First of all, we're going to start with the roll call. After that, our Secretary General, Hedda Spengemann, will deliver a speech. After that, we will have a first set of opening speeches, followed by a speech of the Mayor of Oldenburg, Jürgen Vogel. After a short break, we will continue with opening speeches and a guest speech by Dr. Kirstin Leitner. Our opening ceremony will finish with a final set of opening speeches. First, we want to start with the roll call. We'll call out each delegation's name. When you hear your name, please raise your placard high and state present. Afghanistan, Albania, Algeria, Andorra, Angola, Antigua and Barbuda, Argentina, Armenia, Australia, Austria, Azerbaijan, Bahamas, Bahrain, Bangladesh, Barbados, Belarus, Belgium, Benin. Benin is not present. Bhutan, Bolivia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Botswana, Brazil, Brunei Darussalam, Bulgaria, Burkina Faso, Burundi, Cabo Verde, Cambodia, Cameroon is not present. Canada, Central African Republic, Chad, Chile is absent. China, Colombia, Congo, Costa Rica, Cote d'Ivoire, Croatia, Cuba, Cyprus, Cyprus? Cyprus is not present. Cyprus is present. Czech Republic. Denmark. Djibouti. Dominica. The Dominican Republic. DPR Korea. DR Congo. Ecuador. Egypt. El Salvador. Equatorial Guinea. Eritrea. Estonia. Ethiopia. Fiji. Finland. France. Gambia. Georgia. Germany. Ghana. Is Ghana present? Ghana's present. Greece. Grenada. Guatemala. Guinea. Guinea-Bissau. Guyana. Haiti. Honduras. Hungary. Iceland. India. Indonesia. Iran. Iraq. Ireland. Israel. Italy. Jamaica. Japan. Jordan. Kazakhstan. Bless you. Kenya. Kuwait. Kyrgyzstan. Latvia. Lebanon. Lesotho. Liberia. Libya. Liechtenstein. Lithuania. Luxembourg. Madagascar. Malawi. Malaysia. Maldives. Mali. Malta. Marshall Islands. Mauritania. Mexico. Moldova. Monaco. Mongolia. Montenegro. Morocco. Myanmar. Namibia. Nepal. Netherlands. New Zealand. Nicaragua. Nigeria. Niue. Norway. Oman. Pakistan. Panama. Papua New Guinea. Paraguay. Paraguay? Paraguay is absent. Peru. Philippines. Poland. Portugal. Qatar. Republic of Korea. Romania. Russia. Rwanda. Samoa. Saudi Arabia. Senegal. Serbia. Seychelles. Singapore. Slovakia. Slovenia. Solomon Islands. Somalia. South Africa. South Sudan. Spain. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is present. St. Lucia. Sudan. Sweden. Switzerland. Syria. Tajikistan. Tanzania. Thailand. Timor-Leste, Togo, Trinidad and Tobago, Tunisia, Turkey, Turkmenistan, Tuvalu, Uganda, Ukraine, United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, United States of America, Uruguay, USSR, Uzbekistan, Venezuela, Vietnam, Yemen, Yugoslavia, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Amnesty International, Center for Civilians in Conflict, Consumers International, Greenpeace, Human Rights Watch, Human Rights Watch, Human Rights Watch is not present. International Committee of the Red Cross, International Petroleum Industry Environmental Conservation Association, Médecins Sans Frontières, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, World Health Organization, World Heritage Watch, World Heritage Watch. The World Heritage Watch is not present. World Trade Organization. World Trade Organization is not present. Permanent Observer Mission of Palestine. Is there any delegation in the House that hasn't been named? Then please raise your placard high. As this is not the case, we finished the roll call. I would now introduce our Secretary General of OLMUN 2019, Hedda Spengemann.
Most Honorable Presidency, Honorable Mr. Krogman, most distinguished delegates, distinguished MUN directors, dear guests. Standing before you today as the Secretary General of the Oldenburg Model United Nations Conference 2019 is not self-evident. Not only have I never dreamt of being up here and speaking to you when I started OLMUN as a delegate 3 years ago, but also it is not self-evident that OLMUN even exists. 75 years ago, on the 6th of June 1944, to be precise, the Allied troops landed in the Normandy. It was this day that marked the beginning of the end for the Nazi regime in Germany and the end of the terror they brought to Europe. Today, 75 years later, D-Day is still a symbol of hope, liberty, and justice all around the world. For the first time during the war, the Allies were certain that they could defeat Nazi Germany. For the first time, the oppressed people of France, Belgium, and the rest of Europe dared to hope for the end of their suffering. The end of the Second World War marked the beginning of a new era, of thinking anew and putting all differences aside, which led to the creation of the United Nations. In 1945, a community of all nations might not have been a revolutionary thought, but statesmen were able to prove that they've learned from previous attempts, such as the League of Nations, and established an even stronger intergovernmental organization guaranteeing peace all around the globe. Back then, after one of its darkest chapters, the world was setting off to a new beginning by moving beyond borders. 75 years ago, General Dwight Eisenhower said to his soldiers, "The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you." Nowadays, people from all over the world look upon the United Nations, hoping and praying for humane living conditions, for peace, and for a better future. The United Nations have become an institution trying to overcome borders and moving beyond them. But without the support of its member states, the United Nations are stuck. Great initiatives by creative people from all around the globe fail due to the lack of willingness. While the world faces tremendous challenges and problems shaping the face of the earth forever, politicians abandon the small person and the only planet we have. The United Nations sets its agenda in order to fit the demands our world has, socially, ecologically, and economically speaking. The Sustainable Development Goals show the challenges and problems that need to be fixed by 2030. Yet, only little progress has been made since the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals 4 years ago. While there are just some success stories, most projects only proceed at a slow pace. And that is due to humanity's deepest fear: change. But changes are crucial for our planet. How could we otherwise create a more peaceful, more just, and more healthy environment on Earth? Sticking to old dogmas is not a solution to solve the same problem. Is it not common sense that if an attempt fails, you try something new? When opening the newspaper, I read about nuclear threats, the destruction of our rainforests, melting ice at the poles, politicians canceling global treaties, water being polluted, children being kidnapped and raped, and demonstrations for the freedom of our press being dissolved in the most brutal way. The end of World War II heralded the longest period of peace in Europe, but still, 75 years after the war, many people around the globe are oppressed by the governments, are not granted their human rights, and are simply not free. However, change is on the rise. Young people in every continent, in every country, and in every city gather to show governments that they have to pass new legislation solving the climate crisis, that they have to invest in research rather than war, and that they have to set off to a new beginning. Creating a more peaceful, more just, and more social planet is not an easy task. It takes a lot of courage and hard work to make a difference. But every step into the right direction is a step towards change, improving our everyday lives. Therefore, let this OLMUN be an inspiration for each and every one of you. Get in contact with other delegates, debate about your ideas, and try to understand the other person's point of view. Only through debates, discussions, and compromises, we can make a change. Only cowards go the way of isolation and separation. Let us go the way of change, and let us be the change we want to see in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, today we once more set off to a new beginning. I hereby declare the 19th International Session of the Oldenburg Model United Nations Conference for officially opened. The floor is yielded back to the Presidency.
We will now start with the first set of opening speeches. First, we will call up 5 delegations to the podium to deliver the opening speech. Clapping is only in order after each set of opening speeches has finished. After that, we will allow 3 rights of reply, which are not a point of information to the speaker, but are just a comment by a delegate in the House. If we hit with our hammer 1 time, we would like to ask the delegate to come as closing remarks. After 2 hits, we ask the delegate to please yield the floor back to the chairs. We want to call up to the podium the delegation of Bhutan, Bulgaria, China, Croatia, and the Dominican Republic. In that order. Note passing is in order during opening speeches. The delegate of Bhutan, you now have the floor.
Thank you. Dear Mr. President, honorable chairs, fellow delegates, and distinguished guests. War, epidemics, digital media. It might seem that these topics have nothing in common. However, they do. They affect us all. Compared to others, the Kingdom of Bhutan is a small and less economically developed country, but we have to deal with those problems the same way as all other nations. As an example, with the help of several organizations, Bhutan is currently working on improving their health system through building new hospitals with the best technology possible. The Kingdom of Bhutan urges all member states to pull together and work as a team. Through the implementation of global laws, agreements, and strategies, we're able to move beyond borders. Thank you.
Could the delegate please yield the floor back to the presidency?
So yielded.
The clapping is only in order after each set of opening speeches. Bulgaria, you now have the floor.
Esteemed President, respected chairs and fellow delegates, as members of the same world, it is only fair that each of us work hard on together to improve peace, growth and prosperity of the entire human race. For the 3rd year in a row, there has been a rise in the world hunger. The absolute number of people who are facing chronic food deprivation has increased to nearly 821 million in 2017. Right now, it is time to ask ourselves why. Why we are letting people all around the world die. The answer lies in the insufficiency of the international cooperation to help humanity. Just like the theme of this year's conference's addresses, Moving Beyond Borders, we are so lucky to express our deepest satisfaction about the latest improvements in the world problems. However, without resolving our disputes amongst each other, such dire threats will not cease to exist. Thank you.
Could the delegate please yield the floor back to the presidency?
We yield the floor back.
The delegate of China, you now have the floor.
Dear Presidency, distinguished delegates, and others present, we find ourselves in the middle of a changing era. Borders are going open, and our horizons are being broadened. But with that, we must keep in mind that each footstep leaves a footprint, and then each voice leaves an echo. With that in mind, we need to unite together and move together in one direction. We need to put footprints in the motion of unity. In this, China will continue to act out as an international factor, as a major and responsible country. Let's not talk about my footprint. Let's talk about our footprint. Thank you. The delegation of China yields the floor back to the presidency.
Thank you, Delegate. The Delegate of Croatia, you now have the floor.
Dear Mr. President, dear chairs, honorable delegates. After years of oppression, we, the Republic of Croatia, stand here today as a member of NATO, a member of the EU, and a member of the UN. This demonstrates what transnational cooperation and moving beyond borders yield to a newly free nation. We encourage all nations to pursue a path to democracy and international friendship. Our delegation wishes that our nation and nations like ours can guide the road to a new beginning. We hope that all nations move away from nationalism, because only if we walk hand in hand in peace, we can reach prosperity. Thank you. I yield the floor back.
Thank you, Delegate. Could all delegates, Bhutan, Bulgaria, China, and Croatia, please remain standing on the podium or return, as rights of reply will be heard later on, and you have, as a delegate, you have to face him. So Bhutan, Bulgaria, and China, please return to the podium. The delegate of the Dominican Republic, you now have the floor.
Dear Mr. President, honorable delegates, we have reached the time for change. We cannot go on like this anymore. We have to take action right now. As we are all here today, as we all represent our respective nations, we should, nay, must cooperate. We must take the motto of this conference seriously, as we have the opportunity to march on to a new beginning. Let us not fall back into old traditions of hate and distrust, but seize the opportunity that was given to us to move beyond our borders. Let us work together to give the people of this world what they deserve. The floor is yielded.
Thank you, Delegate. We'll now hear rights of reply. Are there any rights of reply in the House? If so, please raise your placard high. The Delegate of Chad, please approach the microphone. The Delegate of Chad.
Yes, we have a short reply to the speech of the Delegate of China. The delegate talked a lot about footprints, and we just believe that in order to make the future better, China should consider its carbon footprint. And that's it.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there any other rights of reply in the House? Seeing there are none, the delegates may now return to their seats. We will now watch the first issue of the OLMUN Morning Show.
Welcome to the OLMUN Model United Nations 2019, and welcome to the first episode of the OLMUN Morning Show on the official OLMUN TV YouTube channel. My name is Sarah and I'm the host of the show. Welcome. Today we want to introduce you to everything you need to know to survive this week. Before we do that, you'll get to know the Inner Circle, the team that prepares and executes the OLMUN every year. Now you can get some impressions of the work we've already done to prepare OLMUN 2019. Now I will introduce you to today's timetable. Since we're in the opening ceremony right now, most of the work for today is done. You passed the registration and some of you participated in the introduction. The opening ceremony will last approximately until 4:30 p.m. And in the evening, there will be a barbecue at the Graf Anton Günther Schule, which starts at 7 p.m. Please make sure not to wear your OLMUN outfit, since no one likes ketchup stains on dresses or suits. During the week, you as a member of the OLMUN will have several discounts in stores around Oldenburg. In the following, we'll show you the stores where you can get drinks or foods for cheaper when showing your badge. All of the discounts can be found in the official OLMUN app, available on Apple App Store and Google Play Store. You will get 10% off at Vitamina, Salon Coco, Stadtbäckerei and Voiten, 10% off at Gelateria San Marco if you choose to stay there and eat some ice cream from the menu. Your sauce for free at Fritz Pommes, 15% off at Captiva and 15% off foods and drinks at Heimathaben. Special prices for menus at Venezia, Florians and Baldini's. Other discounts as seen in the app at Grüne Motte, Mu, Asiahang, Extrablatt, Hardy's, Trattoria and Sahara if you need a new haircut to look good during committee sessions. Please make sure to always wear your badge, because you will only get the discount by showing your badge at the place of desire between June 18th and 21st. For more information on everything in this video, you can have a look at your survival pack or download the official OLMUN app. There you will have the opportunity to receive notifications, get navigated to every location on time, read the latest newspaper, and get to know the team behind the OLMUN. Make sure to download the app, which is available in Apple App Store and Google Play Store. That will be the end of today's morning show. Have fun, enjoy your first day of OLMUN 2019, and see you tomorrow. Bye.
We'll now continue with another set of opening speeches. I'd like to invite the delegates of Egypt, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Germany, and Japan to the podium. Delegate of Egypt, you now have the floor.
Dear Mr. President, honorable delegates, with great effort and at great cost, the Islamic State has been defeated. But this is not the end of terrorism. It still happens that nations support terrorist groups active within other nations. This has to stop. In order to achieve peace, we have to fight together against terrorism, against all terrorism. Where we are now is the beginning of a new fight. Not one to end terrorism, but one to prevent terrorism altogether. And to win this war, we have to stand together on an international and on an interfaith level. And therefore, we call upon all member states of the United Nations to set aside national and religious boundaries and fight terrorism together. Thank you. We yield the time back to the President.
Thank you, Delegate.
First, we would ask all delegates to please keep sitting on their assigned seats. All the hallways and aisles have to be freed in case of an emergency. All chairs must be at the spot where you found them first. Looking right in front of me.
Delegate of Equatorial Guinea, you now have the floor.
Distinguished Secretary General and Executive Committee, honorable chairs, and fellow delegates. This year's conference theme of moving beyond borders is the key of achieving a greater balance in terms of development between the nations of the world. No single organization or country can address the complex challenges our world faces today. Partnerships among nations remain essential to maximize our impact on people's lives and advance a global order based on international law. Delegates, we all play a major role in encouraging proper globalization. Like the former Secretary General of the UN, Kofi Annan, had stated, globalization is a fact of life, but I believe we have underestimated its fragility. Thank you. The floor is yielded.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate of Eritrea, you now have the floor.
Dear Mr. President, honorable delegates, located in the Horn of Africa, the state of Eritrea understands the relevance of working together as a continent, especially regarding transnational topics such as climate change and epidemic prevention. But coming from a history of foreign administration and forced federation, the Eritreans are proud of the independent state they've created. Last year, border crossings between Eritrea and Ethiopia were reopened as part of a peace treaty, ending the border conflict and renewing diplomatic ties. But apart from political borders, uniting Islam and Christianity, 9 different ethnic groups, and even more languages, the government of Eritrea knows the benefits of bringing people together and moving beyond borders. Thank you. I yield the floor back to the President.
Thank you. Flapping is not in order. Delegate of Germany, you now have the floor.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the House, nowadays the world is experiencing a full-blown power revolution. A terrifying accident in Fukushima in 2011 became an impulse stimulating a turn to safer energy sources. German approach is reflected in the unique program, that of Energiewende, as 94% of Germans connect their future with renewable energy sources. Not only is Germany planning the phase-out fleet of nuclear reactors to be completed by 2022, but it appeals to all progressive and reasonable forces to follow this concept and turn to green electric power. Scientific progress may give us the chance to preserve the planet. That is why we must not let nuclear apocalypses destroy the future of the generations to come. Thank you. We yield the floor back to Mr. President.
Thank you, Delegate. The Delegate of Japan, you now have the floor.
Dear Mr. President, Honorable Secretariat, dear members of the House, moving beyond borders has many meanings. It means international dialogue, it means helping and supporting other, less stable countries, it means building new political alliances and preserving the old ones. All that cannot happen in one country or with only a few countries supporting these ideas. To make those ideas happen, to move beyond borders, Japan believes that all member states present here today need to communicate, to overcome boundaries, and try to come up with solutions for the world's most pressing problems, which are discussed in our committees. When that process of coming up with solutions together takes place, we are off to a new beginning. Thank you. The floor is yielded.
Thank you, Delegate. Then we will now entertain 3 rights of reply. Are there any delegates wishing to do so? Yes. World Health Organization. Followed by a Pika.
First of all, this would be a reply to Egypt mainly, but all the delegations present on the floor at the moment. The right of reply would be whether the delegations would be happy and able to extend their message of unity they presented here today towards the fight of international crime and smuggling all around our world.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there any further delegations wishing to their right of reply? The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime.
The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes would like to express their gratitude for the recent donations of Germany and hopes that the country will continue their support. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. 1 second, one last right of reply. Chat, you've been recognized.
Thank you, dear President. This right of reply is directed at the speech of Egypt. We would just like to express our concern and true doubt in the statement made by the Egyptian delegate that they would like to tackle international problems at an interreligious level, because according to a 2014 global survey by the Anti-Defamation League, 74% of Middle Eastern citizens agreed with the statements Jews have too much power in international financial markets and that Jews are responsible for most of the world's wars. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. The delegations may now take their seat. Thank you very much. Note passing is now out of order, so admin staffs, please go back and distribute the other notes when note passing is in order. No note passing anymore. We would now like to ask Mr. Jürgen Krogmann, the mayor of the town of Oldenburg, to deliver some words. Please welcome Mr. Krogmann.
Dear Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, dear members of this House, welcome to the 19th International Oldenburg Model United Nations Conference, OLMUN. With more than 1,000 participants, OLMUN is the largest Model United Nations Conference in Germany, as well as in all of Europe, that is organized by students. Congratulations to all of you who helped to make this event happen. Thank you. Bringing together so many young and enthusiastic people to experience the work of the United Nations is already a great success in itself. So I am very pleased, as mayor of Oldenburg, to assume patronage for the conference. And we, the citizens of Oldenburg, are truly honored to host the conference and to welcome you all in Oldenburg. It is a pleasure for me to see so many students from different countries and different cultural backgrounds. All of you are here to experience, to learn, and to discuss international relations and politics. In the upcoming days, you will have a full schedule of meetings and lots of works to do on various political topics. They are all topics the international community has to tackle urgently and needs to find solutions for. Although at the OLMUN everything is just happening in theory, the topics and the processes you will be working on are very real. Especially the conference theme, Moving Beyond Borders. The theme of this year's conference, Off to a New Beginning, Moving Beyond Borders, is already becoming reality with all of you gathering here. Looking at international politics, one might get the impression that every nation is just defending its own interests. But we cannot longer afford to look at politics only through the narrow frame of our national interests. We might have national borders, but the problems of our times do not stop there. The second example is the climate change. We are all living on the same planet. The effects of the climate change will be or even are already felt all over the world. One or few nations alone will not be able to stop it. It needs the effort of us all. Third example, poverty and conflicts. Even if they military conflicts or poverty happen far away from our doorsteps. In a globalized world, they affect us, every one of us in various ways. Our society can fly into space and clone animals, and still we have not managed yet to prevent wars or eliminate hunger. Worldwide, over 800 million people go hungry. There is enough food produced worldwide, but these people lack access to it. I'm not saying that it is not easy to solve these problems. After all, there are close to 200 countries part of the United Nations, and in the upcoming days, as delegates, you will come across many opinions and perspectives on political matters. Some of them will be very different from your own perspectives, or in the case of the conference, different from the perspectives of the country you are representing. So I am sure you will experience how difficult it can be to negotiate political compromises and to find effective solutions. But for successful politics, and as a local politician, I can assure you this is not only true on international affairs. For successful politics, we need to broaden our mind and learn to accept and to understand other perspectives as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming here, and all the best and good luck for your conference. Thank you.
Mr. Koopman, could you stay on the podium? Would like to thank you for this wonderful speech. I now like to make some advertisement for social media, so please follow us on Snapchat at OLMUN_official or on Instagram at OLMUN_official. And also try out our new app, the official OLMUN app, which gives you a great overview about your committee, the locations and all events happening during the week, so you can look up everything you need to know for OLMUN. And lastly, before we go into break, I want to show you some of your merchandise. So this is, for example, our Skyline t-shirt, and in the foyer next to the registration, you can buy some other motifs too. And our dear presidents of the Economic and Social Council have a little gift for you. Thank you. We'll now have a 15-minute break. Please be back on time.
in the air. Hit the toe so bad. Look out. Pop, pop, it's showtime. 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 Guess who's back again? Oh, they don't know. Oh, they don't know. I bet they know as soon as we walk in. Shut up, I'm wearing Cuban links. Inside a mix. Inglewood's finest shoes. Don't look too hard, might hurt yourself. Don't give the color red, the blue, give the color blue. I'm a dangerous man with some money in my pocket. Keep up. So many pretty girls are falling in the wicked up. Keep up. Why you mad? Fix your face. I thought they all be just keep up. What y'all trying to do? Only what you're trying to do. 24-karat magic in the air. Hit the toe so bad. What y'all thinking? Raise up to the moon. What y'all trying to do? 24-karat magic in the air. Hit the toe so bad. Look out! Don't get the color red, the blue, get the color blue. I'm a dangerous man with some money in my pocket. Keep up. So many pretty girls are falling in the wicked up. Keep up. Why you mad? Fix your face. I thought they all be just keep up.
There's a fire in me, melting at the bottom of the sea. It was a beautiful thing. And all these memories trying to hold me back, but they can't see. I was born to be free.
lonely night. Everybody's happy. Been turning around, looking for a friendly light, but I see nothing. No eyes on me.
Ambulance coming, so you are allowed to take water to your seats. Take a lot, drink a lot, and stay hydrated. The dress code has been lowered. All male delegates or female delegates are allowed to take off their jackets. So don't feel obligated to wear your jackets. It's allowed to take them off. Could the House please come to order? Could all delegates please take their seats? We will continue with another set of opening speeches, and therefore we would like to call the delegations of Liechtenstein, Malta, Nepal, New Zealand, and Panama to the podium. And please, all speakers, go closer to the microphone. You can pull it down to you because the acoustic wasn't as good in the first half of the opening ceremony. So go to the microphone and speak into it and don't shy away from it. The delegations of Liechtenstein, Malta, Nepal, New Zealand, and Panama.
No passing is in order again.
The delegation of Liechtenstein, you now have the floor.
Dear Mr. President, honorable delegates, it seems both striking and incredible that in the 21st century, the era of technological and medical breakthroughs, about 20 million people annually all over the world are infected with measles, which have already caused 110,000 deaths of mostly children under 5 years. With armament exports increased by 30% in 2018, it sounds disgraceful, the existence of spots where it is easier to get access to a handgun rather than to a gulp of clean drinking water. Race of armament, anti-sanitary, epidemics, local wars have put the humanity on the edge of survival. Being a tiny country as Liechtenstein is does not mean having no concern about the future. We are strongly willing to support all campaigns possible to combat dangerous challenges of the century. Indifference is the greatest tragedy. Thank you for your attention. I yield the floor.
Thank you very much. The delegate of Malta.
Dear Mr. President, honorable delegates, the pre-thought of the United Nations was and still is to fight for more peace to the greatest extent that is possible. Although we aren't the biggest country, we are determined to solve the immense problems in today's globalized world. But we aren't able to work on those problems alone. We need to stand together and work in an integrated manner to be able to move mountains. Malta aims to prevent any kind of medical, economic, or other life-threatening issues in any country, working effectually for world peace. With that saying, the delegation of Malta hopes for passionate work together. Thank you. I yield the floor back to the President.
Thank you, delegate. The delegate of Nepal, you now have the floor.
Good afternoon, fellow delegates, esteemed chairs, distinguished guests. Due to the earthquake in Nepal in 2015, about 9,000 people were killed, many thousands more were injured, and more than 600,000 buildings in Kathmandu and other towns were either damaged or completely destroyed. Following the earthquake, Nepal's weak economy was weakened even more, and thus needed even more help from other fellow nations. After receiving most needed aid from states all around the globe, and especially from China and India, the delegation of Nepal fully believes that the world can move beyond borders to help each other in times of need and strive for a new beginning. For when we try to solve global problems, we start by thinking about the world instead of nations, because modern problems require modern solutions. Namaste. I yield the floor back to the President.
Thank you, delegate. Clapping is not in order. The delegate of New Zealand, you now have the floor.
Dear Mr. President of the General Assembly, honorable delegates and guest speakers. There are 194 countries in this world, and in line with this year's conference theme, we have to take the initiative to work together as a unit. Let us forget about the barriers that keep us apart and focus on the important issues. We have to recognize that eradicating poverty is the greatest global challenge and an indispensable requirement for sustainable development. We have to find new possibilities and new solutions together due to the fact that it is urgently needed to shift the world onto a sustainable path and stop the destruction of our planet. The delegation of New Zealand is very pleased about having the opportunity to participate in OLMUN 2019 and would be delighted to work together with other delegations in the following days. May God save the Queen. Thank you. The delegate of New Zealand yields the floor back to the President.
Thank you, delegate. The delegate of Panama, you now have the floor.
Distinguished Madam Secretary General, distinguished Mr. President, dear delegates. Moving beyond borders after a new beginning is not only the motto of this year's conference, but also one of Panama's deepest attitudes. When in August 1914 the Panama Canal opened, it was crystal clear it would not only connect the Pacific and the Atlantic, but the whole world. Trade is not only an exchange of goods and services, it is also an exchange of culture and morals. We want to live in peace. Global free trade is a necessity we need to achieve. Panama is doing its part. Is your country doing its part as well? To all those of us who build barriers instead of bridges, who prefer walls rather than souls, we want to express our deepest condolences. The time of nationalism and protectionism is over. Long live global free trade. Thank you. The floor is yielded.
Thank you, delegate. We will now... Note passing is out of order now. During the rights of reply, we'll have it out of order now. So are there any delegations wishing to have a right of reply? Asking again. Is there any delegation having a right of reply? The World Health Organization, you have been recognized. Please approach the microphone.
Responding to the delegate of Panama, first of all, thank you for the speech given here, and the WHO would very much like to put an emphasis on the problem that lies in free trade, since it is not only a matter of good but also a matter of evil. Would the delegate be able to accept this reply?
Okay, thank you, delegate. Are there any other rights of reply in the House? Seeing there are none, the honorable delegates may now take their seats. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Kerstin Leitner. She is a professor at the University of Potsdam. She has worked for 30 years all around the globe for the United Nations, for the United Nations Development Program, and for the WHO. She's visited 120 countries and lived in Africa, China, New York, and Geneva. Please welcome Dr. Kerstin Leitner.
Mr. President, Madam Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. No? Yes, indeed, we need a new beginning of political and diplomatic multilateralism, and we need to find ways and means that help us address the problems which transcend national borders. We need new ways which allow us to cooperate among nations in a constructive way. To do so, we need to go back to the origins of the United Nations, and we need to recall the letter and in particular the spirit of the United Nations Charter. Only such a recollection of the original purpose and mission will allow us to make the UN fit for today's global and international challenges. You all know the United Nations were founded in the name of the peoples of the world. According to the Charter, the United Nations were to free the world of the scourge of war, faithfully observe human rights, ensure that international law is respected, and to do so that social progress and better living standards in larger freedom can be promoted. In order to achieve this, the Charter states, we shall practice tolerance, live together in peace as good neighbors. We shall unite in order to maintain international peace and security, and to use armed force only in the common interest. In addition, the Charter said that an international machinery should be set up which will promote the economic and social advancement of all peoples. I'm speaking today to you as a former senior UN official and not in any official capacity. This gives me the liberty to neglect for a moment the existing realpolitik and to share with you some, what some might consider bold proposals for reform of the United Nations. This neglect, albeit temporarily, is in my view necessary to allow for clear thinking and to worry about the feasibility of these ideas afterwards. In fact, I would like to strike a bargain with you. I give you some ideas, and you translate them into tangible results through your deliberations and decisions at this meeting. Let me start by stating the obvious. The UN are not the only multilateral organization which exists today. There are the international financial institutions, the IMF, the World Bank. There is the World Trade Organization, the OECD, G20 and G7, regional groupings like the European Union, ASEAN, Mercosur, the African Union, Arab League, and so on. Neither is the UN the only global multilateral organization. For instance, the IMF is a global organization, and which even has an advantage over the United Nations because it has policy-based financial means at its disposal with which it can enforce its fiscal policies, without, however, always giving due regard to the economic, social, and other consequences of such enforced policies. But that's another story for another occasion to talk about. Still, many believe that the UN is unique in spite of all its shortcomings, and it would have to be invented if it did not exist. The question then is, what makes them unique, and which are the shortcomings which we need to overcome? As to the uniqueness, 4 points come to mind. All internationally recognized nation states are members of the United Nations. Second, they thus represent almost 100% of the world population, true to the opening statement of the UN Charter. We, the peoples of this world. Third, all member states have an equal vote, whether they represent 500,000 people or 1.4 billion people. The UN are thus not leaving any nation state behind in their current voting structure. Besides, the UN decision-making bodies cherish the voting by consensus. Foremost, however, the UN stand for a very specific thinking and a set of values. They stand for settling conflicts through negotiations and compromises, and not through wars. And the UN are built on the respect of the human rights for each and everybody. Now, this third and fourth point lead me right into the middle of the shortcomings of the United Nations. Powerful national leaders of today do not think that diplomatic negotiations and compromises are valuable as political solutions. They consider deal-making and/or military action as more important. They do not believe that the rule of law and the protection of human rights are the best guarantee we have against the abuse of power and the mistreatment of people, but that the protection of self-interest should be our first priority. What then can be done to overcome such a philosophical divide? The short answer is we need different political leaders. But that is easier said than done. Therefore, while we wait for having such new leaders elected, let's review some of the advice and reform proposals we might wish to give them. My first point concerns participation. In national democracies, we give all people above a certain age voting rights. And we establish constituencies which represent an equal number of such voters. Hence, would we not need to introduce some differentiation to the voting system within the UN? Besides, in national elections, we have political parties as transmission mechanisms between the general voting population and the eventual representation in parliament. Do the government of nation-states still suffice as such transmission mechanisms in the UN? Of course, we have groupings among the member states, such as the Group of 77 in China, regional groupings, the least developed countries, small landlocked countries, small island countries, and so on. But can we consider them to be adequate in terms of representing different interests and views among the peoples of this world? There are ideas to establish a global parliament which would have representation based on population size. Is this feasible, or at least desirable, as an additional UN body? I come back to that. My second point concerns delegation of authority. As we all know, the voting situation in the Security Council, the highest executive body of the United Nations, is different. All 15 members are equal in terms that they have each one vote, but 5 countries have a permanent seat and have a more important voting power than the others because they can exercise a veto. And when they do that, this normally means negotiations stop and a planned resolution is dead, although the General Assembly can assume direct responsibility of the issue if 2/3 of the member states vote for such an action. But let me add at this point, it is not the veto of the member states as such which is the stumbling block. It is the fact that such vetoes are cast in an effort to block a specific view by one or the other permanent member. In particular, the European members and non-permanent members of the Council have developed many informal mechanisms to work around these clashes between the United States of America and Russia and China on the other side. But in my view, the Council will only develop its rightful watchdog function and pass resolutions which represent enforceable solutions when these clashes can be overcome. I will also come back to this point. Thirdly, global developments. In many ways, the system did hold during the decades of the Cold War, as no global military conflict erupted, but only among and within smaller nations, although we all know that in many cases these were proxy wars, having the 2 blocs supporting different camps from behind the scenes. Some attribute the avoidance of a global war to the existence of the atomic bomb. And no doubt this threat played an important role. But I believe it was also the possibility of leaders from both blocs to meet at the UN and to speak freely. When in 1989 the Soviet Union collapsed as a union, and with it the Soviet bloc, free market economies and neoliberalism became the dominant political philosophy, with global free trade and large multinational corporations with direct foreign investments in many countries. At the same time, the East-West impasse over human rights appeared to have been overcome at the Vienna Conference on Human Rights in 1993. The UN, under the leadership of Kofi Annan, attempted to develop, in fact, a blueprint for global development through a series of international conferences and the Millennium Summit in September 2000. The aim of these conferences, there were 9 altogether, was to uphold human rights as the guiding value and to create social justice while at the same time managing the use of natural resources sustainably. And while all these conferences ended with a consensual result, the adherence to the decisions were, let's say, spotty. Technically, all the UN summits of the 1990s adopted normative outcome documents and resolutions, some of which with mechanisms for measuring progress along agreed targets, and some ended in binding conventions such as the Convention on the Right of the Child and also some ILO conventions. Now, 30 years later, the ground is shifting again. But this time, we witness that the UN is unable to uphold the spirit of the UN and oblige member states to stick to existing international law and the UN Charter. It is not that today there are no forces within and around the United Nations committed to the spirit and letter of the UN Charter, but political leaders, as I have mentioned already, say, my country's interests have priority over all international and global interests and concerns. And these leaders occupy the main stage of international politics today. Which camp will become the decisive force and shape the future world politics is too early to say. But what we most likely shall see is the strengthening of non-governmental forces, such as civil society networks on the one hand, big business on the other, and many other actors in between. They all will bring strong pressure on national governments. Again, what will be the outcome of these interplay of different forces, let's say in 10 or 15 years from now, is too early to say. But in 5 points, I would like to summarize what the current result of this interplay of forces is. First of all, neoliberalism and economic globalization have created incredible wealth concentrated in the hands of a small number of families and countries, while at the same time alleviating a great part of abject poverty. Acute income poverty decreased between 1995 and 2013 when measured at the global level, but both in relative and absolute terms, they increased in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, although in all regions, life expectancy and educational levels were raised. These developments are coupled with the depletion of most of the planet's natural resources beyond their capacity of renewal, and are causing global warming, which, as we all know, as yet is not under control. My second point is that neoliberalism and economic globalization have even accelerated the development of new technologies and unleashed a wave of digital applications which create unknown opportunities, but also great disparities within and among countries. Thirdly, the difference between the haves and the have-nots is growing to an unprecedented extent. As 1% of the world's population have the same wealth as 50% who live on this planet, the rich perpetuate unsustainable economic activities, in particular unsustainable production and consumption. And this, in turn, is limiting equal opportunities for an ever-growing of people. The most dynamic among those disadvantaged people seek opportunities for themselves and their families as migrants, and often work and live under trying circumstances. On the other hand, with their remittances, they often sustain developments and changes in the democracy of their regions and their countries of origin. These developments and changes in the democracy create a widespread sense of insecurity and fear among many people in many countries, which in turn leads us to nationalistic, xenophobic, and racist political trends. We experience a growing defiance of the principles of human rights and respect for the agreements which most countries have ratified. Hundreds of human rights activists, climate change activists, journalists are imprisoned, tortured, or even killed each year. Fifth, since the late 1980s, each year there are around 50 armed conflicts ongoing in the world, with no end in sight of this military fighting. And even when the Security Council unites and passes a resolution to end these conflicts, little, if anything, is achieved, although we need to acknowledge that there would be even a greater number of armed conflicts if it were not for the many UN-led peacekeeping missions around the globe, and the uncontrolled fighting and terrorist attacks are still putting a large number of civilians in deadly danger nevertheless. Now, clearly, all of these trends are against the UN Charter. Now, what has been the UN response to these developments to date? What have the Secretariat and the member states done? One important step was the globally led discussion through national, regional, and global consultations and through the internet, and the formulation of the Agenda 2030 with its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which the General Assembly approved in September 2015. The participants in these consultations were government officials, staff of NGOs and other civil society organizations, individuals of all ages, but in particular young people like you, pupils and students. They together elaborated a social, economic, and ecological blueprint for the world. If and when all goals are met, we clearly shall live in a very different world. Because the agenda in nature is transformative and demands a lot of creative and innovative action in all countries. In those countries where the UN funds and programs and the specialized organizations like World Health Organization, Food and Agricultural Organization are active, they assist in accelerating this transformation. In OECD and or European Union countries, necessary actions are left to the national and regional authorities. But not all these countries have as yet taken the Agenda 2030 on board. Regrettably, Germany is just such a case. So much remains to be done in this country of ours, as in many other wealthy countries. ECOSOC and the reformed system of United Nations resident coordinators certainly will play a crucial monitoring role, and they will point out periodically the achievements, or rather the danger of not achieving the agreed goals. Now here we can of course not overlook that the consensual adoption of the Agenda 2030 is non-binding on member states. It is thus, in a way, only a wish list. But the question is, can it, or at least should it not be more? Although for all international treaties, there are monitoring processes in place, but we also know that their power does not reach further than blaming and shaming those who do not fulfill the treaty obligations. It's interesting to note that international cooperation with regard to SDG 10, overcoming inequality within and among countries, has until now found the least operational attention. And yet, we do need a global policy debate how to foster creativity, innovation, change, without, however, continuing the current practice of winner takes all. Innumerable studies exist about the various aspects of inequality and inequity. Many proposals have been made, in particular with regard to steer funds into those countries which are disproportionately left behind in the global economy. But I think we are not as yet addressing the root causes of such uneven developments. Getting rich may be glorious. Getting super rich, however, is a problem. Being individually free to choose our own lifestyle and course is okay, but if we leave lots of others in the process behind, it becomes a problem. In other words, we need a global debate on how we want to balance in future individual pursuits and the pursuit of the common good. In academic circles, the debate has begun. One very elaborate and early study is Tony Judd's Ill Fares the Land, and of similar interest are writings by Piketty, Stieglitz, Oxfam, and many others. But such academic discussions are just beginning to reach the political sphere. For instance, the Economic Forum in Davos this year had a report from an expert group stating that the existing inequality is a major global threat, similar to climate change. And the UN organizations, too, have done quite some thinking in this regard in recent years. The UN Research Institute for Social Development in Geneva has published its report on 2010 already on inequality. UNDP, World Bank, UN Women, the UN Department for Economic and Social Affairs have reports that all address this problem. The high-level political forum that meets in July next month will be dedicated to discuss SDG 10. So there is a debate, but it's yet not really forming policy formulation and politics. On the other hand, it's equally interesting to note that with regard to SDG 3, health and well-being for all, cooperation within and among countries is booming. And we even have a global action plan because of an initiative of Germany, Ghana, and Norway, which came out of the G20 process. And this global action plan has, among others, measurable milestone targets to be reached by 2023 and a very elaborate monitoring system which shows where the gaps are between current trends and needed developments. Clearly, it would be very helpful if we had similar global action plans for all the other SDGs as well. Now, often the UN don't mention the price tag which such an ambitious agenda carries. Fortunately, our colleagues from the World Bank have in this regard a sharper eye. They have calculated that over the remaining years until 2030, we are short of some $350 billion a year, roughly equal to the budget, national budget of the Federal Republic of Germany. If one considers that member states spent some $1.8 trillion in 2018 for military purposes, a reduction of this expenditure of some 20% might help. Alternatively, the World Bank suggests to use private-public partnership more than before, but that, as you probably also know, raises other issues. Now, let me come what the UN should be doing in addition. In some ways, this is the chicken-egg situation. What comes first? A change in our thinking and attitudes, or a structural reform which will change our thinking? Let me turn first to and come back to the issue of the Security Council. In a few words, the Council has to become more representative of all current member states. Hence, the composition has to be changed. I personally favor the proposal to divide the world into 8 regions and to give each region 2 seats. All regions shall have veto power, but a veto should only be acceptable if and when a draft resolution violates the letter and/or the spirit of the United Nations Charter. In other words, we need to define when and how a veto is permissible. If you wish to read more about this, I suggest you read on my website the article which I published on the subject. But in addition, in a reform proposal for the Security Council, there should also be that the current practice of the Council to formally review many conflicts and other threats to global peace, that the Council should also look at issues which are global in scope and scale and threaten international peace and stability. And you all know that the current Secretary General has made prevention sort of the main topic of his tenure. It should be acknowledged, of course, that the Council in recent years has been extremely active and diligent in its review and monitoring of the threats and conflicts. And very little is known beyond the UN of this work. So first of all, we have to overcome this invisibility of the Council's attention on global issues. But in addition, I think the Council should also pick out issues like climate change and disarmament, and eventually agree on a binding decision. Germany is taking up, as currently a non-permanent member of the Council, some of these issues and is forming coalitions with members from other regions, but in my view, it could be more forceful in this endeavor. Because we all know that acting on Article 26 of the UN Charter is long overdue. Now, while for climate change and disarmament there are separate UN bodies that exist and they should continue to exist, I still believe that it is indispensable that the Security Council from time to time throws the spotlight on these issues, as was done some years ago with regard to the HIV/AIDS epidemic. The discussions in the Security Council clearly gave the fight against this threat to the global society a big push and greater attention by all the member states. Initially, HIV/AIDS was a runaway epidemic. Today, at least we can say, it has become a partial success story. We have not yet conquered the disease, but we certainly have contained further spread of it. My second point concerns to make participation stronger. We need to come much closer in the United Nations bodies to reflect the will and interest of all the peoples of this world. Now, potentially, organizationally, this is a minefield. But let me still throw in the following idea. A vote in the General Assembly and its subsidiary bodies should in future be valid when more than half of all member states, representing at least 51% of the world's population, have accepted a draft resolution. This will replace the consensus mode, but of course it still allows consensual decisions. Such a change, by some people, are considered to be a breach of one country, one vote. But I actually don't agree with that because, I mean, you would only allow some countries to vote against and some for. But in addition, it may actually help to accelerate decision-making in the UN bodies and may encourage many more member states to deal with global issues at and through the UN in a proactive manner. And of course, it should also make the decisions binding for all member states, the same as we have in national parliaments. Even those who voted against, if a law passes, then it is applicable to each and everyone. As you know, consensus decisions by the General Assembly today remain non-binding. I therefore would welcome, in fact, if the G20, rather than to meet separately, would carry its work into the UN and would spearhead this part of the reform process. Third, financial imbalances exist and they should be reduced. This again is highly controversial, but I still would like to confront you with it. In my view, the assessed contributions to the UN Secretariat should be kept at a much lower level than today. Currently, the United States of America paid 22%, while the next largest contributor, Japan, pays only 10% of the total budget, as do the next in line Germany, China, France, and Great Britain. A country like Russia pays only 3%. Such capping may actually lead to reductions in the overall income. But at the same time, it will give also further push to a reform of the Secretariat in New York and in Geneva. Basically, the Secretariat should focus, as it does in the area of humanitarian assistance, on the coordination of activities by other UN organizations, and furthermore, it should serve the Security Council, the General Assembly, and other UN bodies. Technical cooperation activities should be transferred to specialized UN organizations and thus free up the Secretariat's financial and human resources. Fourth, managing a better global participation. There is a need to improve the mechanisms by which we have the peoples of the world participate in meetings and conferences. The process leading to Agenda 20, which I shortly outlined earlier on, was a big step in that direction, but now we also have to organize that for the phase of the implementation of this agenda. In particular, we need to ensure that civil society organizations from all member states are admitted to discussions of UN bodies. This is a very tall order, and by definition, admission will have to be selective in order to make these meetings manageable. But just assume we would admit 2 NGOs from each member state to a session, that would roughly be 400 representatives. We could still then expand the participation, but we would give NGOs from smaller countries a much higher visibility and ability to attend. If such national NGOs were to opt not to attend, but rather want to be represented by an international NGO, I think that would be okay. Because at present, too many NGOs accredited come from only a small number of member states, mostly Western and economically wealthy, while excluding others from smaller and poorer countries. My fifth and last point is strengthening the enforcement capacity. This, of course, is the most difficult part of the reform agenda. Because decisions need to be enforced by member states themselves. We thus need to do 2 things. We have, on the one hand, to strengthen the authority of the UN bodies in such a way that member states have to respect the relevant decisions and feel obliged to implement them. Furthermore, regional groupings, alliances of the willing, and their political and military forces can and should serve as powerful enforcement mechanisms. The case of Kuwait after the Iraqi attack in 1991 is still a model for such collective and successful action. Why then did we not continue to act in a similar way in Syria and Yemen? This is not the place to analyze these cases in further detail. Suffice it to say that international peace has to be secured by the member states with mandates from the UN Security Council. We need to reintroduce the responsibility to protect, which we needlessly misused in the case of Libya. And we need to confirm the principle that human rights are a higher legal norm and standard than national sovereignty. To get there, we do need a different approach to solving such crises. President Truman made a statement in June of 1945 during the closing session of the UN Founding Conference in San Francisco, and he said, "We all have to recognize, no matter how great our strength, that we must deny ourselves the license to do always as we please. No one nation, no regional group can or should expect any special privilege which harms any other nation. If any nation would keep security for itself, it must be ready and willing to share security with all. That is the price which each nation will have to pay for world peace. Unless we are all willing to pay that price, no organization for world peace can accomplish its purpose." A current case which begs for a solution along those lines is Venezuela. I was interested to see that you had actually the president from, one of the presidents from Venezuela in your video. While it is admirable that the Norwegian government once more is engaged in mediating a solution, the Security Council should have been given such a mediation mandate. But as 3 of the 5 permanent members have vested interests in this Venezuelan conflict and have each taken sides, as members of the Security Council, they should be acting in the interest of the Venezuelan population. And that, at this stage, means mediation and not taking sides. Furthermore, in cases of armed conflicts like in Syria and Yemen, the Council should not only impose sanctions and a weapons embargo from all sources, but it should also be able to enforce this decision. Monitoring alone will not suffice. It will indeed demand a military command which is empowered by all member states to intercept weapons delivery. The international justice system will need to act on those who defy a Council decision and have offenders stand trial in the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity or even genocide. In cases where the Security Council comes to the conclusion that none of the warring parties can protect the civilian population within a foreseeable future, the UN should be authorized to establish a trusteeship government, which temporarily will assume, under the UN flag, the public administration, while the national political camps negotiate a settlement to their conflict. In Syria, we have some elements of this solution in place, but not all. In Yemen, we are all watching helplessly as this man-made disaster is ongoing, and the UN cannot protect the civilian population effectively. In order to oversee such cases of a caretaker government, the Trusteeship Council should be given a revised mandate. However, such cases should be rare and only the last resort. Yet, the situation of East Timor after its vote for independence from Indonesia can serve us as a model, as the UN caretaker government has produced a very positive and lasting result. In this context, one quick word on sanctions. We need to avoid that sanctions harm the civilian population, and we should, through the UN, make it very clear that sanctions are ineffective means to bring about regime change. Furthermore, sanctions should be based on a collective decision by the Security Council and not be decided unilaterally. In conclusion, these ideas that I've shared with you in today's international politics are radical. And they clearly demand a very different political thinking if we ever want to get to implementation. The nation state will continue to exist, but all national leaders will have to assume their share of responsibility for international peace and people's well-being everywhere, as President Truman said in 1945. Civil society organizations have a tremendously important role to play to bring about such change, again, in all countries. We need networks and solidarity, and we need stronger mechanisms to uphold the authority of the UN in order to level the international playing field. One word of caution. When we have to criticize some of the UN actions and some of its UN officials, then we should do that. But we have to guard ourselves against discrediting the whole UN for such shortcomings. Each of my above proposals is related to the 4 dimensions of democracy, namely accountability, participation, fairness, and equity. They, in turn, are the building blocks for people to live in larger freedom. You will note that I'm not suggesting that there's only one political system which aligns all these building blocks properly. I think there are many different ways by which we can use these building blocks and construct a solid democratic home in each country. How to do this, we shall leave to the people of each country. But we can, of course, from the UN side, provide a helping hand to improve their respective governance system. The way forward. Undoubtedly, such UN reforms will need extensive discussions within and among the member states. Equally beyond doubt is that such reforms cannot just be left to governments and their diplomatic representatives. We need a spectrum of participants in such a reform debate which reflects the complexity of today's governance system with non-state actors such as NGOs, the business world, media, and scientists. We have to start a process of consultations in a similar way as was done for Agenda 2030. Now, fortunately, the UN Charter actually gives us an opening for such discussions. In Article 109, it is foreseen that every 10 years a general conference should be held which assesses whether the UN is still functioning according to the demands of the global challenges. Such a conference was never convened, but I believe it is high time that it be held and that we discuss with the same commitment as was shown by the founders of the UN in 1945 in San Francisco, how to rebuild a UN which can indeed immeasurably ensure international security, peace, and human well-being, while fostering and relying on international cooperation and development. I leave it to you, the members of this assembly, to tackle these ideas and maybe to establish a roadmap which will get us to a new beginning. My ideas are not only meant to make the UN more effective. I think they reach much farther than that. They push the envelope, as one says in English, when one formulates ambitions which reach way beyond the existing conditions. Let me close by stating the following. On the basis of my 30 years with the United Nations, I can unreservedly say that the UN is making the life of many people better. The UN gives people hope and encouragement, and through its operational activities supports their survival, and it helps them to create better living conditions for themselves and their families. In fact, my experiences, I have reflected in a book which was published recently. My ideas aim not only to recognize the UN's soft power more widely, but also to give the UN some means by which hard power can be exercised in cases where international law, human rights, and the well-being of people are violated. We do need a United Nations which is not only one among many global and multilateral organizations, but we need a United Nations which is the flagship for the whole fleet of all nation states and multilateral organizations, and thus for all the peoples of the world. Thank you. Now, I'm not by no means the only one who speaks this way, who lives this way, who has written about it. I've given you here only a few recommendations in case you haven't seen these books. I can unreservedly recommend them for your reading. Thank you. And then two more websites, first of all my own, on which you actually can also read my memoirs in English, because I first published them in English, and then they were sort of high in demand, and that's why they also then later on were published in German. But the other website I recommend, because you recall that I spoke about the invisibility of the work of the Security Council. Now, this is a website of a small NGO in New York, and they follow every week what's going on in the Security Council. So if any one of you is interested in following more closely what these diplomats do there in New York and why they spend whole nights in meetings, read this and you will know.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Leitner. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I think the delegates found it as informative and inspiring as we did. Are you open to any points of information by the delegates? So Mrs. Leitner has opened herself to points of information. Are there any points of information in the House? Canada, you have been recognized. Please approach the microphone.
Is this one? Oh, yeah, it is. So the delegation of Canada would firstly like to thank the guest speaker for their speech. It was very inspiring for us. The delegation of Canada recently visited another Model United Nations session dealing with the issue of cybersecurity. Do you agree that cyber warfare and cybersecurity, especially now that we live in a digitalized era, is an issue that should be more talked about within this conference?
Sorry, what should be more talked about?
Do you emphasize us to issue the topic of digitalization more within this conference?
Well, deterioration is always a relative term, and you have to be very careful that you have the right information at your hand. In fact, as I was preparing the speech, I was seeing a passing reference, and then I didn't have the time to follow it up, that in fact, for the first time in the last few years, the number of military conflicts in the world has gone down. You remember I said in the speech there were roughly every year some 50 armed conflicts going on. So I would, and you also have to define what you mean by security. Because not all let me put it that way. There are definitions that are not just related to armed conflicts, but in fact to the security that you have in a society to conduct a decent life. So you have to agree which part of security you wish to discuss. But to answer your question, yes, I think you should be dealing with it, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other points of information in the House? Seeing there are none, it seems that Mrs. Leitner has already answered all of the possible questions in her presentation. So thank you very much again.
Sehr gut gefallen. Das war eine sehr, sehr schöne Präsentation.
Vielen, vielen Dank, das war wirklich schön. Das war sehr, sehr cool. Wunderbar, ich bin eine große Identität. Oh, das ist sehr gut. Das trifft sich sehr gut. Vielen Dank.
Ja, können natürlich schon mit dem Kleinen.
Perfekt, wunderbar. Vielen, vielen Dank.
More guest speakers throughout the week will be in the Human Rights Council, where Marina Kakuli from Adopt the Resolution will talk on Wednesday, 11:30 a.m. There will be another guest speech in the ECOSOC, where Alexander Foster from the Bayer AG talks also on Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. In the special conference, Hans Lucker from Amnesty International will talk on Thursday at 2 p.m. And in the GFRs, Jürgen Gresslin from Aktion Aufschrei will talk on Thursday at 4 p.m. So if you're, especially the MUN directors, if you're interested in visiting those speeches, it's your time to take a photo, this presentation sheet now.
We'll now move on with the last set of opening speeches. For that, I would like to call upon the delegates of Peru, the Russian Federation, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland to approach the podium. Note passing is in order again.
Although note passing is in order, would the House please come to order as opening speeches will be heard?
The delegate of Peru has the floor.
Dear Mr. President, honorable delegates, at this point in time, this world faces a multitude of crises, whether they are political or economic crises, conflicts, or the dangers of climate change. Sure, every country has its own issues and the right, of course, to focus on their national interests. However, is nationalism really an answer to all of our issues? Some problems may be larger, some problems may reach beyond borders, and some problems may require countries to work together. The Republic of Peru believes in the necessity of dialogues and therefore strongly urges everyone to never stop talking, no matter what. Global problems require global solutions in order to achieve peace and order. Thank you. The floor is yielded.
Thank you, delegate. Clapping is not in order. The delegate of the Russian Federation has the floor.
Mr. President, Honorable Secretariat and Chairs, esteemed guests and fellow delegates. Since the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989, we've seen an ever more progressing globalization. This new beginning, the move beyond borders, and the exchange of scientific and cultural knowledge has changed our politics, trade, our whole global society. While we, like most other countries, profit from that, we must never forget the importance of sovereignty. To quote our great President Vladimir Putin, Russia was always a sovereign state and will always stay sovereign and independent. Still, we must recognize the importance of international diplomacy in tackling issues affecting and harming us all. Thus, we are honored to be at this conference and to be able to take on all challenges cast upon us by a globalized world. Thank you. The floor is yielded back to the presidency.
Clapping is not in order. Thank you, delegate. The delegate of Saudi Arabia now has the floor.
Honorable Presidency, honorable chairs, distinguished delegates, dear guests. During the last few years, our technological opportunities proceeded incredibly. This makes it possible to communicate all over the world. But the frightening consequence of the technological process we made is violence. Nowadays, our world is open up to modern machine guns which can kill whole crowds within a blink of an eye, and unimaginably powerful war machines which makes it easy to destroy entire cities. These huge weapon systems and our technology enable a strong distance to past regional conflicts which people can paint by pitchforks, and leads us into mightily positions from where we can wage war on another continent just from home. We need to break the chains of war, to stop the terror happening all over the world, to herald the start of a new, better and peaceful era of coexistence and freedom. The floor is yielded back to the chair.
Thank you, delegate. Delegate of South Africa, you now have the floor.
Dear Mr. President, honorable delegates, borders are just illusions, looks like our limits, but they're not, and we can pass beyond them and do better things. South Africa thinks that we can change bad circumstances into better ones by collaborate. We can find new solutions or improve previous ones and achieve a better future. South Africa invites all countries to collaborate and to be in action all together. Thank you. The delegation of South Africa yields the floor back to the President.
Thank you, delegate. The last opening speech by the United Kingdom. Delegate has the floor.
Honorable Presidency, dear fellow delegates, dear guests, after having found some time between the lengthy and intensive preparations of the upcoming Brexit, we are now very glad to be here. We desperately need a change from the exhausting Brexit debates. In 2016, we have already started to move beyond borders by preparing to leave the European Union. To leave everything like it is probably the easiest way, but when nobody gets active, nothing will happen. In this year's OLMUN Models United Nations Conference, We, the delegation of the United Kingdom, want to encourage all other present countries to come out of their comfort zone and to start to change something for all human beings on this planet. Or, with other words, a journey of 1,000 miles must begin with a single step. The floor is yielded back to the presidency.
Thank you, Delegate. Clapping is not in order. We'll now hear 3 rights of reply. Are there any delegates wishing to do so? Papua New Guinea and Chad after him.
Delegates, this one is working.
Due to technical issues, we'll just wait a minute.
Okay, test. Yeah, it works.
Okay, the delegate has the floor.
Okay, so Papua New Guinea noticed that Saudi Arabia talked about breaking the chains of war. But as far as we know, Saudi Arabia ordered weapons worth over $1 billion US dollars, at least in the last year. So please consider your point, if you want to break the chains of war, that you stop ordering weapons first. Thank you.
Clapping is not in order. There will be order in the House, please. Any further rights of reply? The delegate of Chad has already been recognized.
Yes, interestingly, our right of reply is also directed at the delegate of Saudi Arabia. Chad would just like to mention that we see a great paradox in the way that Saudi Arabia acts as opposed to the words that were said in the speech given by the delegate of Saudi Arabia, as they are, as already mentioned by Papua New Guinea, one of the largest purchaser and importer of foreign arms, and currently are active in a lot of representative conflicts in the Middle East, such as Yemen, Syria. We just wanted to point out that these actions stand in, well, are greatly paradoxical to the speech given by the delegate, and we would just like to also reconsider maybe what you said. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. One last right to reply by the Delegate of India.
Our right of reply is directed at the delegation of Great Britain. So the delegation of India encourages the idea of Great Britain leaving the EU since it has also finally left India. Thank you.
Clapping is not in order. The delegates might take their seat. So, now we're at the end of our opening ceremony. We just want to give you some information about what's happening next. Right after the opening ceremony, we will meet outside the WEH. If you go out the main entrance, take a left, you will see some greens. Over there, we want to take the official OLMUN picture with all delegates. So after the opening ceremony, please all go inside. You can leave your bags. There will be admin staff watching out for them. Take them back later. Just take them with you, and we will meet on the greens right behind the WEH. Keep sitting, we're not finished yet. WEH, we'll meet there for a photo. Today at 7 p.m. there will be a barbecue at the Graf an der Günther Schule, where we will have normal and vegan brats for all delegates. So our entertainment team has prepared everything, and we hope to see a lot of you there. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. committee session will start at the various committee venues. To know where your committee venue is, just look into the conference guide or online on olmun.org in the download section, or also the app. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. we invite all MUN directors to our MUN directors breakfast at Café Extrabad, and we will cover the food. So, last but not least, welcome at OLMUN 2019.
So powerful, before you play.